So we'll move into our topic, what are HSCA studies. So we'll be detailing about the HSCA studies, its application in oil and gas industries, along with an example or case study from one of our major project. So for confidentiality purpose, we won't be revealing the client details, but we will be we'll be having an overview of the project. So HSCIA Health, Safety and Environmental Impact Assessment, which is a systematic process of identifying HSE impacts of existing facility, or it can be new or substantially altered projects, and establishing the mitigation requirements for those identified HSE hazards. So HSCIA report is a living document. It is required for four project life cycle, main project cycles, which includes the phase one, which is conceptual design and feed stage. The second one, the EPC. The third one, operation, and the phase four, which is the decommissioning or demolition phase. So the major objectives of HSCIA studies includes it demonstrate the compliance with HSE regulations and standard as per the project location, a streamlined prevention plan for the major accidents and the HSE, and to ensure that HSE management system is in place. Health and safety hazards and environmental impacts have been identified, recorded, and assessed to ensure all the environmental impacts and risks are being managed, and to confirm that all the suitable measures have been identified and the critical equipment systems are in place to prevent the hazards, and to confirm that an on-site and off-site effective emergency plans have been drawn up, and the risk of project activities are in alert, which is as low as reasonably practical. And a sound hour plan will be, and to ensure that a sound hour plan is in place to safeguard the life, property, the environment, and the business. So the basic objective is HSCIA ensures that all the controls are in place, and if there is any recommendations required to reduce the risk to further possible way, it will be ensured in HSCIA. And the importance of HSCIA, we can see many of the industries, many of the accidents happen in the industries. So here we'll be taking one example of BP refinery explosion and fire, which happened in the Texas city of USA, which occurred in March 23rd of 2005. 15 were killed and 180 were injured, and the cause, the post-incident examination have shown the cause as a hydrocarbon, which is heavier than air after combustion, coming into contact with an ignition source from probably a vehicle engine, have been caused this flammable gas and further resulted into the explosion. So if we have conducted a proper HSCIA studies, including the quantitative risk assessment, which assess all the potential or which identify all the potential hazard sources, this can be prevented. So the benefits of HSCIA studies are to identify the potential HSE risk, to identify measures to deal with these risks, and to remove risk of unnecessary downtime, and to avoid preventable injuries, and to prevent environmental disasters. So along with the benefits of removing all the potential HSE risk, it will reduce the unnecessary downtime and increase the productivity. So next we will see the standards and regulations which are applicable to the HSCIA. So it includes the UK HSE executive regulations which are adopted worldwide, which includes the chemicals, hazard information and packaging for supply regulation 2002, the control of substance hazardous to health regulation 2002, reporting of injuries, disease and dangerous occurrence regulation 1995, the transport of dangerous goods regulation 1999, lifting operations and lifting equipment regulations in 1998, the control of noise at work regulation, the construction design and management regulation 2007, control of major accidental hazards regulation 1999, the control of vibration at work regulation 2005, dangerous substance and explosive atmospheres regulation 2002, the construction health safety and welfare regulation 1996. These are some of the major regulations from UK HSE. So other international regulations will also be considered based upon the project location. So some client specific standards we have mentioned here, which include the Shell HSE standard, BP HSE standard, ADNOC HSE standard, ISO 3100 risk management standards, and other occupational health standards as well. So starting with the case study which we are considering is HSCIA study for a sulfur handling unit. So the facility, the objective of the project is to convert hydrogen sulfide from the acid gas feed streams coming from a refinery to elemental sulfur and oxidize the remaining sulfur compounds to sulfur dioxide, which is less than 5 ppm H2S prior to discharge to atmosphere. And the process achieves ammonia destruction less than 30 ppm of ammonia in the gas stream exiting the condenser. And the facility will be operating with a higher recovery of sulfur, 99.9 weight percentage, complying with a stringent atmospheric SO2 emission limits. So the project objective is to remove the H2S, high H2S content, and along with the production of sulfur compounds which have its own monetary values. The project location. So we'll start with the HSEA process flowchart, and we'll take you all along with the project how we have conducted the study. So this is the general flowchart which we follow for the HSEIA. So it starts with the data collection, the review of data. Then the first step will be the HSEIA workshops and its corresponding reports. So majorly we will be having 3 workshops which include HACCP, NVID, and OHID. These 3 workshops will be the identification steps, which will be qualitatively workshops. So HSCIA, as its name suggests, it have 3 parts, which include the health, which represented by H. So all the health impacts will be identified by OHID workshop. Then the S, which is the safety part. So all the safety hazards, the process safety hazards will be identified through the hazard workshop. Then the E, the environment. All the environmental impacts which can arise from the project will be identified in the NVID workshop. So these 3 workshops, either called a PHA workshop, which is process hazard analysis, will identify all the potential hazards from the facility. So this will be the first step in all the HSCIA studies. So here, hazard, NVID and OHID, the hazard identifying hazard specific to the facility. NVID will be identifying impacts of the project on the environment, and the OHID will be identifying health hazards and risk in the workplace. So we'll go through with one by one. So hazard or hazard identification is a qualitative technique for the early identification of potential hazards and threats affecting the people, the environment, assets, or reputation. So the objectives of hazards are to identify the main hazards associated with the project and to assess the severity and likelihood, which makes the risk of the potential consequence, to review the effectiveness of existing safety measures, and where required, if we feel the effectiveness is not adequate, to increase the safety measures in order to achieve a tolerable residual risk. So hazard identification workshop or hazard will be a guide word approach. We'll be having a guide word approach here. Some of the examples of process hazard guide words are given, which includes inventory. So here in this guide word, we will be assessing that what are the potential hazards if there is excess hazardous material, which will be very common in the oil and gas industry. So the mitigation measures will be including how to minimize the hazardous inventory, or how we can propose an alternate process or utility system. For example, another one will be a loss of containment. So excessive process, and we will examine what are the possible causes of this loss of containment, which includes the excessive process stress, a release of gas or liquid, or a toxic substance, or impact by a foreign object, or a process control failure. So all these possible or potential guide words will help us into look into more detail into the process. And another example can be chemical handling, stored flammable, source of ignition. So this guideword approach will be help us to simplify the process and to help us to identify the real cause as well. So this is the hazard flow chart. The hazard flow chart will be selecting one guide word, and then we'll analyze, is this hazard relevant to our operations or facility? So if it is relevant, then what are the sources of this hazard and where the hazard is located, and what are the worst case credible potential consequence, whether it can be a fire or explosion or a toxic release. Then, so we have identified the hazard, we have identified its consequence, and we have identified the location of the hazard. So next one is we have to rank it. This ranking helps us to assign whether the safety measures are enough. So the ranking have 2 parts, which is likelihood and the severity. So based upon the qualitative metrics, the risk level will be assigned. without considering any existing safeguard. So assign the unmitigated risk level for each hazard. Then we will identify what are the existing controls. Then assign the risk level again, which considers the existing by considering the existing control measures. So we will be having two risk ranking. The first one will be unmitigated risk level without considering any existing controls, and the second will be to confirm the adequacy of the existing control measures, which will be a mitigated risk level. Then after comparing or considering the mitigated risk level, we will be identifying is there any requirement of new recommendation or any additional control layer of protection is required will be identified. So then we'll identify what is the action required, and if there is any actions, then who is the responsible for it and when it must be completed. And these all recommendations will be tracked in the subsequent stages. So this is a sample qualitative metrics which we use for the hazard ranking. So it have x-axis with the likelihood and the severity. So it have certain criteria or certain ranking called which is notable, minor. So based upon the severity, we will rate it whether it is a minor, notable one or a minor one. And from starting from notable, it can up to the disastrous based upon the potential fatality and other impacts. And the likelihood can be ranging from rare to almost certain. So this is a sample worksheet, hazard worksheet, which we use in-house, where we have the certain heads called hazard, which will be the guide words. Then we'll identify the threats, the top event which can lead to this hazard, its consequence, to ranking, which one, the first one is the unmitigated one, and then the mitigated one, then prevention and control measures. This includes the existing control measures and the mitigation or the recovery measures. Then based upon the mitigated ranking, we'll have recommendations as well. So for our project which we are looking now, we have identified 3 high risk and 20 high medium risk, 33 medium risk and low risk. So this classification of high risk, high medium and low comes from our metrics which we have shown here. So based upon this, here we have the green which is low, then the yellow color which represent the medium, then the amber one which represent the high medium, and the high risk one is the red one. So now we'll look on to ENVID, which is the environmental hazards identification or environmental impacts identification. So the ENVID looks at the planned and unplanned impacts of the project on the environment. And this is again a similar kind of approach which we have seen in the hazard. It will be a workshop session with certain guide words. The workshop examines specific activities and determines what aspect of the environment could be affected. So the objectives are systematically identify the activities and analyze the planned and unplanned environmental aspects of the facility. Then identify all aspects of environment and evaluate the impacts associated with all activities. Then identifying the control and monitoring measures that are in place. And then we will identify any additional measures are required to prevent or mitigate the impact to allowable environmental standards. And this also provide input to the management in its efforts to manage risks related to environmental issues. So here also we have the same sections like guide words, but here the guide words can be air emissions, the noise and vibration, discharges to water, liquid effluents, solid waste. So this some companies will have a fixed set of guide words, or it will be according to the ISO risk management standards, which provides all the possible guide words. And here we have the socio-ecology impacts as well. So this also follows the same procedure of hazard. First, a unit or area of the project will be selected, and then an environmental aspect will be identified. Then identify all sources of the aspects, quantify the impact duration and characterize. Then identify all environmental receptors and evaluate the inherent severity of each of the environmental impact. Then list out all the environmental controls in place. Then we will assess the residual impact, whether it is significant. If it is significant, any identification of additional controls or mitigation measures. So this will be done in like for other units as well. So this is one of the one sample metrics. So environmental impacts can either be a planned environmental hazard. Example, we have a planned emission. So it will be measured with severity and the impact duration, because it's already planned. There will be a flaring emission, or there will be a planned emission. So it is planned when we know the impact duration. There will be an unplanned one which also have the severity, but uh, in place of duration we will be having the likelihood of having that aspect. So planned and unplanned impacts will be analyzed separately. So this is a sample NVID worksheet where we use it. So it have the activity, which are the guide word, then the aspect will be identified, then the impact and its consequence, then what are the legal requirements, then we'll identify the existing preventive and control measures, then the monitoring measures and the risk ranking based on the metrics. So if there is a requirement of any further recommendation, those recommendations will be provided. So this is the NVID workshop summary. So here we have identified no high risk was identified, medium risk, 7 medium risk and 11 low risk, and 1 high medium risk was identified. So now coming to a third aspect, which is the health hazards, occupational health hazards identification or OHID workshop. So OHID involves a systematic identification of health hazards associated with the operation of the facility and assessment of the proposed measures to eliminate, mitigate, or manage those hazards. So the objectives of OHID are to identify and create an inventory of agents potential hazardous to health, then assess the risk to health associated with the exposure to these agents against the specified screening criteria, then decide on the control measures required, if any, to remove or reduce the risk to health to a level as low as reasonably practical, and consider any emergency measures needed to mitigate the acute or chronic health effects if the control measures fail. So here, so OHID, HACCP, OHID, NVID all follow the same process. So here also we'll have having the guide words, which includes chemical agents, physical agents, which have the certain aspects. Including in the chemical agents, we'll be having paints or other chemicals used in the facility, and the physical agents will have noise or hand arm vibration, whole body vibration. So these all sources will be identified. And this is a sample occupational health risk matrix. We will be using similar kind of metrics which we have already seen for the HACCP. So this is the HACCP OHID worksheet sample. So here we will have the guide words under the heading of physical, chemical, and we'll identify the hazard and the corresponding activity, route of entry, how the and health impacts, how this aspect will be affecting the health of the people, and a similarly exposed group or SEGs. So these are the exposed group in the facility, and their duration of exposure and the frequency of exposure. So considering the duration of exposure and the frequency of the exposure, the ranking will be finalized. Then we'll also identify all the existing control measures to check the adequacy of existing control measures. So if we feel that these existing control measures are not enough for the protection or providing the protection of health, then we'll go for the further recommendation, which will reduce the impacts. Uh, impacts. So this is the OHID workshop summary. So here we have identified 1 high medium risk, 9 medium risk, and 9 low risk. So by this we have covered the first section or first stretch of studies required for identification of all the health impacts, process safety issues, and the environmental issue. So in the next step, we will detail or quantitatively analyze these identified impacts. So before starting into next set of studies, we'll have a Q&A session.
I will raise question. Most of the question people have asked is answered. It's like first one, a common question is asked whether which type of guide words will be used. In that case, the guide words which normally when we use it for as per standard, there is a terms of reference which is submitted to company or contractor, which is approved by the final owner of the facility. and those will be used normally in workshops. So all assumptions, all guide words, all material related to workshop is mentioned in the terms of reference, which is approved. So this was a common question raised by them. There were some questions raised regarding which ISO standard is applied in HSCI case study. We'll just go back to the slide where we said standards. We'll just have a look at it.
So normally ISO 3100 risk management standards are applied for the HSCIS studies if there is no client specific standards or the regional HSC rules or regulations. So these are the standards.
Okay. Next question was, does NVID look at the weather patterns that may cause the dispersion accidentally release material so far away from the location?
So NVID is a qualitative analysis. So we won't be looking into detail of the dispersion over here, but we'll be having further quantitative studies which analyze what will be the impact on ground level considering all the possible scenarios, including the weather.
And there is one more question. People couldn't see properly the risk matrix, but during workshop, normally we enlarge it. We take a big copy, which is being displayed, and which can be. I mean, on this presentation, I know that this is we can't enlarge and spend more time on what kind of risk matrix is that. But normally, which is taken from the company approved standards or company standards, and these will be you can enlarge it during workshop, refer to what kind of severity and likelihood you are referring to, and it can be visible. So the question where there like risk matrix is not visible, but see for this, yeah, definitely in the presentation when you see it in this, you can stop it, enlarge it on the YouTube and see it will be visible. But better to follow the company standards which you are going to do for this. And then there are a few more questions. We will take it and then we'll move on to the next one. What is the limitation of hazard studies? Okay, limitation of hazard studies. If our design is not yet finalized, your layouts are not done, it's better not to do hazard because these are all based on the locations. These are all during hazard. We discuss that, okay, proper locations of the building, looking at the prevailing wind direction, the separation between equipment, plant and buildings. So all those will be considered. If these documents are not finalized, then it should hazard should not be done. I will take a last question, then there will be a second session we'll talk. In this case, okay, social risk assessment and impact assessment as a part of HSCIM. Yes, the answer is yes. We do social risk assessment. We need to have impact of because of the project facility or the existing facility upon people who are public or people who are staying nearby. So definitely the whole concept is because of our own facility or the project facility, the impact, because there are guidelines, there are criteria which will give us guideline that we should not exceed certain limits which are acceptable worldwide, that the impact on people should be within that range. It is not acceptable that because of your factory people are affected maybe less than the required limit, and then in that case, yes, there will be issues, public will be always protesting on that. So the first thing is you can manage the hazards in your facility and you can control it properly. It should not go out of your, that is the baseline. It should not go out of your facility, and if at all it goes, you should have preventive measures or mitigative measures to minimize impact on public. I think we will not go each and every question. We will come back to you again at the end of session also. So let's move on to the second section.
Just one more point. Many of you are asking about the certificates. So as I mentioned earlier, certificates will be issued to those who have attended at least 80% of the webinar and have participated in the discussions through any Q&A. Many of you are asking about the materials, PowerPoint presentations. Unfortunately, that cannot be shared, but the recordings will be shared with all the qualified registrants. move on.
Yep,
Yeah.
let's move on to the next session. So we have identified all the potential hazards. So we have received some queries regarding the details of, detailed impacts will be, whether the detailed impacts will be assessed in this workshop. But as I mentioned earlier, these are qualitative studies. So we will be looking into the overall picture and we'll identify the major hazards. And from here, we will be quantitatively analyzing and we'll confirm whether this is a significant impact or significant hazard. So now, after identifying all the hazards, environmental impacts and the occupational impacts, we'll be classifying the hazards into two, which include the non-major major accidental hazards or non-MAHs and significant environmental impacts, and MAHs and the significant impacts. So first we will be having the non-major impacts, which will be dealing with the existing control measures, and all the major accidental hazards will be further evaluated. So the MAHs will be identified from the hazard environment and overhead review, then identification of hazards from the HAZOP report. So we have already also received one question regarding the HAZOP. Yes, HAZOP will be also be considered to identify the major accidents. Then the classification of hazards into MAH and non-major accidental hazards, significant environmental impacts and non-significant environmental impacts, and high occupational health risk and the non-high occupational health risks. So now every company have a existing or the health safety and environmental management system. So the purpose of the HSEMS is to handle all the low risk safety hazards or the non-significant impacts, health and environmental impacts will be handled by the existing company safety management system. So as a part of HSEIA, the company's existing HSEMS will be reviewed to identify whether it is adequate to handle all these identified non-MAHs. So the structure will be the company structure, responsibilities, practices, procedures, pros and resources for implementing the HSE management system will be included in the HSEMS framework. Then HSEMS provides minimum elements which should be covered by each HSE activities and its related control procedures. So these control procedures, like examples, control of emissions to air, the PTW system, the confined space entry, or control of working at height. So all these elements will be covered in the HSEMS. And if we identify those hazards we have identified already, which are non-MH, will be handled with these control procedures. And this is general structure of HSEMS, which have the leadership, the different elements. So the element 1, which have leadership and commitment. The element 2, which have policy and strategic objectives. Element 3, which is organization, resources and competence. Element 4, which have the risk evaluation and management. Element 5, with planning, standards and procedures. Element 6, implementation and monitoring. And then the element 7, which is audit, how these whatever we have implemented will be auditing whether it is implemented in the correct way, and the management review, which includes a further improvisation of the existing plan. So here we have detailed the elements. The element 1, which includes the leadership and commitment, which can be again subdivided to visibility, the monitor and guide cultures, a proactive in target setting and informed involvement of all the leaderships, and code of conduct. Then element 2, which include the policy and strategic objectives, which have the HSE policy, the strategic objectives, dissemination. And element 3, which includes organization, resource and competence. This element will be specifying the roles and responsibilities of the organization, the resources included, HSE personnel, the competence required, the contractors and suppliers, and the communication guidance. And the element 4, which is the core part of the HSEMS, which include the risk evaluation and management. So this again have the 5 steps which we have already discussed in the starting, which starts from identification, evaluation and assessment, control, ownership and performance, recovery, and recording. And the element 5, which is the planning stage, which include all the planning, standards and procedures, which have the HSE plan, the asset integrity plans, the standards, procedures and work instruction, and the documentation guidance, management of change, contingency planning and emergency response. So element 6, which is the implementation and monitoring of the HSEMS system, which includes the implementation, how to identify the non-compliance and what are the corrective actions required, the performance monitoring and records, incident follow, incident reporting and follow. And the seventh one, which is audit, includes the audit plan, the auditor competency, the contractor auditing. And the final one is the management review, which will be identifying the potential missing of the HSEMS and any improvisation plan. And next we will go into now we have seen how the non-MAHs will be managed. So we will be looking into detail how the major accidental hazards and the significant environmental impacts identified from the project will be handled. So here we'll first see the environmental impact assessment or EIA, which deals with all the significant environmental impacts. So EIA is a systematic assessment of potential impacts from routine and non-routine operations and activities. EIA includes all the mitigation measures will be proposed where significant adverse impacts are identified to ensure that such impacts are minimized to an acceptable degree. EIA process helps to define the environmental management and monitoring requirements such as construction environmental management plan, waste management plan, operation environmental management plan, and decommissioning environmental management plan. So in EIA, we'll identify the first step of EIA, which ENVIT does, is the identification of environmental impact as environmental impacts. Here we will be quantitatively assessing the identified impacts and the mitigation measures will be proposed. And certain management plan will be made based upon the EIA conclusion, which I have just listed out, including the CMP, WMP, OEMP, and the decommissioning management plan. So the approach will be project and site-specific data collection and review of the data, then conduct the ENVIT workshop to identify all the potential environmental impacts. Then the next step will be environmental impacts register. This will be from the ENVIT workshop. Then project scoping through scoping checklist. Then establish environment baseline through a baseline survey. So environmental baseline survey will give a picture or clear picture of the existing project area without considering the project. And then the air quality, so the main baseline surveys are air quality monitoring surveys, groundwater sampling, soil sampling, and noise monitoring. Then the impact assessment and evaluation, which is the core step of EIA. So whatever impacts we have predicted in the ENVIT will be potentially will be quantitatively evaluated in the impact assessment using certain quantitative tools, including the air dispersion modeling, where we will model what will be the ground level concentration of each of the pollutant released from a particular source. Then the noise assessment study, where we will be predicting what will be the noise impact from the identified equipment to a particular distance where a person or employee will be present. Then the soil and groundwater assessment, which studies what will be the or how will be the movement of the pollutant stream in the land and water. Then the final preparation of a EIS report, which gives the environmental impact statement. And finally, the environmental action and management plan, which details what are the action or management plans required to mitigate these identified impacts. So this is the again flowchart of EIA. So EIA starts with the terms of reference. So first, after identifying the major steps, we will be having a terms of reference, and there will be a communication and reporting, information collection, and identification of aspect of impact. So this is one of example of air dispersion modeling results from one of our project. So here we have analyzed three pollutant, which includes NO2, SO2, and CO2, and what are the ground level condos, or we have produced the ground level condos. So from the ground level condos, we will be knowing after a particular time. Example, we have considered 1 hour here. So we'll be seeing what will be the concentration seen at the ground level after 1 hour from the particular source. So the environmental impact assessment results where the major aspect we have considered here: effluent discharge, marine ecology, land and groundwater, and noise. So no direct effluent discharge was identified in the facility. The process effluent and stormwater drain system are routed to amine recovery unit and the existing stormwater collection unit respectively. Hence, no significant planned impacts were identified for the effluent discharge. Then impact on marine ecology includes the project was located almost 5 kilometers from the marine water body. Hence, there were no interaction with the marine body, and hence this impact was scoped out. So here we have the a scoping study we conducted and identified all the required impacts or all the potential impacts. So marine ecology was scoped out. Then impact on land and groundwater. So with the existing control measures, the impact on land and groundwater due to the accidental leakage is assessed to be insignificant. So hence, this became an unplanned event. However, there were enough control measures were in present, and hence the impact is assessed to be insignificant. Then the impacts on noise atmosphere is shows that analysis of equipment noise data and existing baseline noise data concluded that the cumulative impact on noise quality will be low. The facility is inside a industrial complex, so the cumulative impact will be significantly low. Then comes the so now we have finalized the or we have detailed about the environmental studies. So we can have a quick Q&A session.
Yeah, there is one question called what are the softwares being used in environmental studies? So yeah,
so for air dispersion modeling, we have the AirMode software or CalPEF other softwares which are recommended by US EPA, US Environmental Protection Agency. And for noise, we have CATNA, SoundPlan. We have several softwares. So these are the major software we use in for our studies.
yeah, and there was a request from participant to have an example, but looking at the time constraint and the amount of knowledge we have to share, we will definitely in future will include those and we'll give you details about it. Another question which was raised, who approves HFCIA? Normally, every company has got their headquarter and there are subject matter expert in each division who will review HSCIA and the final, I mean, initially it goes to the company operation level at HSE, then it goes to the headquarter where all SMEs from each division will go through and they will ensure that all the aspects of hazards are covered in health, safety and environmental part. And those are properly documented. And there will be comments if there are certain missing elements and we need to, revise it. And the entire HSCI will be presented again as a short presentation to the management of the company, the top management. So there was a question about how much time they take. The presentation part is maybe 2 hours, 3 hours. Otherwise, it goes through the approval process and the approval takes around 2 to 3 weeks from each side to ensure everything is covered in that. And another questions they are asking is in air pollutants, CO and NOx is not monitoring. So SOx and NOx are CO, carbon monoxide. Yeah.
So this depends upon the facility and what are the pollutants we are expecting from the project scope. So we'll in the scoping report we will identify based upon the review of all the effluent summary. We will identify what are the pollutants which are expected from the facility, and we will model all those pollutants.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
so this
sorry.
we have shown a sample like 3 pollutants we have considered: NO2, SO2, and CO2.
This is only sample. There are, I mean, list of pollutants which will be covered. There were two questions. I will take it. What is bow tie workshop? The bow tie workshop is the identification. Yeah, it's coming now, but there was a question. Secondly, what major accident hazard and non-major accident hazard, which is mainly talks about anything which is severe or till disastrous, which is covered as major accident hazard, and anything below that which is medium and low below serious, so major this will be covered by company HSCMS, health safety environmental management system. So this is the difference between those two, where you it starts with a fatality of 1% till major fatalities including public and company people also. So that is the range for major accident hazard. We don't want any fatality. So any accident which creates that situation is considered to be major accident hazard. So I think that's it. We'll shift on to the next one, the coma part, and we'll continue with the presentation.
Yeah, and we have received a lot of questions regarding HACCP. So we are planning to have our next session on HACCP. So we'll have a detailed discussion on HACCP in our next webinar. So stay tuned with us for that. And here we will be next moving into the next section of our coma or control of major accidental hazard, which assess the safety hazards identified in the project. So the coma approach is a systematic procedure for the identification, evaluation and documentation of major accidental hazards, MAH, and the risk level of new projects, existing or the existing facilities and its operation. It facilitates a preventive approach to risk management, as appropriate risk control and mitigation measures are then to be incorporated at an early stage if the project is in design phase, or for an existing operations will identify it before it happens. The main value of the coma approach for existing facility and operations lies in the evaluation and documentation of major accident hazards, with subsequent focus on risk due to modification or update. So in most of the countries, coma is a regulatory requirement for the existing operations, whether even if there is no modification or update. So control of major accidental hazard. So the first step will be the MAH identification, then the MAH assessment studies, then the safety systems registers and identification of safety system and its performance standards definition. Then the alarm demonstration, which demonstrate that all the risk is reduced to as low as reasonably practical. And finally, the emergency response plan, the review or the to confirm the adequacy of emergency response plan. So MAH identification or major accidental identification, it starts with the hazard, envid and HACCP workshops. The MAH or the major accidental hazard is a hazard that has the potential to result in a major accident. It is identified from hazards from the hazard, envid and OHID, HACCP and other supporting documents are screened and grouped into major accidental hazards. Significant environmental impact, including major accident to the environment and high occupational health risk. Then a BOTI will be developed for the identified MAH. The BOTI visually represent the threats and potential barriers and consequence and recovery measures of the MAH. So we'll look into a little detail for the BOTIs. So we have already received one question also. So for this facility, the MAHs identified are loss of containment from the acid gas knockout drum, then the accumulation of gas inside a reactor furnace, and the loss of containment from the tail gas cleanup unit. So these units were identified in the sulfur handling facility. So this is a sample BOTI we have made for the one of the major accidental hazards, which is gas accumulation inside a furnace. So the MAH is the reactor, furnace, and thermal oxidizer. In the so we have in the BOTI we have two sides, the left hand side and right hand side. The left hand side deals with all the threats and its escalation factor, and the right hand side deals with the consequence and the existing control measures. So here we have identified one of the threat, which has shown in the presentation in a blue color, a flame out and accumulation of flammable gases. So here we have a control measure, which is a burner management system, which prevent flame out and accumulation of flammable gases. And we have certain other factors called escalation factor control. So as we have to cover a lot of other topics, we are not going into much detail of BOTIs, but we have previously conducted webinars on BOTIs specifically. So this is a BOTI, and we have the consequence on the right side, the consequence we identified here is explosion resulting in fatalities or asset damages. And the mitigation measure or the preventive control measure is a facility response plan. So the facility, even if the consequence happen, a facility response plan is in place which prevent the escalation. And there are certain other controls we have, or certain things can go wrong in this control measure, which we have identified as ineffective preparedness for emergency handling. And there will be regular mock drills to overcome this hiccup. So this is a visual representation of the image. Then comes the major accidental studies, quantitative assessment of MAH, which include QRA study, FARA, which is fire and explosion risk assessment, ESA, which is emergency system survivability analysis, ERA, which is escape route and rescue analysis, and then if the facility have a H2S, then an H2S zoning study as well. So we'll look into detail. A quantitative risk assessment. A QRA is a systematic and technical approach to analyze the risk from a hazardous activities to form a rational evaluation of their significance in order to provide input to decision-making process. This technique is used to drive numerical estimate of risk by evaluation of hazard frequency and consequence. So in hazard, we have qualitatively analyzed the risk for the hazards. In QRA, we will be quantitatively analyzing it using certain software, industrial accepted softwares, by evaluating the hazard frequency and its consequence. So the objectives of QRA are identifying the main risk contributors to overall risk, evaluating risk reduction measures, estimating or quantifying the risk associated with the hazardous activity or facility, demonstrating compliance with regulatory risk tolerability criteria, and showing whether the risks have been made as laws reasonably practical, and identifying the safety critical procedures and equipment which are critical for minimizing risk and those which need close attention during operation. So through a QRA, we will identify the main risk contributor so that we can give more concentration to that particular portion and evaluate further risk reduction measures. And most of the countries have a regulatory requirements also. They will have a risk tolerability criteria. So by QRA, we will be demonstrating the compliance and show that all the risk has been identified and reduced to as low as reasonably practical. So these are the steps of a QRA methodology. So we'll have the first step will be hazards identification, then failure frequency analysis, which analyzes like what is the probability of this event to happen, then the consequence assessment, which includes the severity assessment, and the step 4, which integrates the failure frequency analysis and consequence analysis, and we will have a detailed risk evaluation or risk assessment. So in hazard identification, we'll have, based upon the hazard, we'll define the failure case scenario using isolatable section markup. Then on the process diagrams, then we will identify the dynamic or static inventory. This will be called inventory assessment. And here we'll be using the guidance from the TNO purple books. Then we in the failure frequency, we have the parts count methodology, where we'll the failure frequency will be assessed based upon the parts count. And then the consequence assessment. So mostly we'll be studying the thermal radiation effect levels from a jet fire or a pool fire, then the vapor cloud explosion scenarios, bleep scenarios, then flammable gas dispersion scenarios as well. So in this study, the quantitative risk assessment study, we have used the software FAST for studying the risk quantitatively. Here we have analyzed the consequence for jet fire, thermal radiation of 37.5 kilowatt per meter square, 12.5 and 4 kilowatt per meter square. Also, we have analyzed flash fire, which comes from the flammable gas dispersion. So we have analyzed the LFL and half LFL. Then the vapor cloud explosion, which includes we have analyzed through the multi-energy and DST obstruction methods, and a vulnerability assessment for human and plant structures have been studied using the OGP standards also. And from this QRA modeling, the following results are extracted. A location-specific individual risk, which was used for the land use planning criteria, then the individual risk per annum for the risk tolerability criteria, and the societal risk. So these three are the main results we identified from the Safety software or FAST software. So in the location-specific individual risk gives an idea what is the risk present in the particular area. And the individual risk per annum or IRPA will help us to identify what will be the risks to the individual who is present at that particular point, and the societal risk, which is represented by a FN curve, will give you what is the risk on the people or population, public outside the facility. So these are the jet fire consequence results we obtained from the facility. This is the results of toxic gas dispersion. So this facility handles sulfur. So we have seen the presence of H2O. So this is a toxic gas dispersion contours, and this shows the overall risk contours from the facility. This includes the jet fire consequence and the toxic consequence as well. So here, this contours in different colors represent the LSIR, or the location specific individual risk for the facility. So here we have obtained the amber colored one, which is inside the facility, or which lies inside the plot plan. So that shows the a risk of 10 to the power minus 4, or that much risk is expected. Then we have the sections, which is 10 to 10, 1 e raised to 10 to the power 1 e raised to minus 5 also. The next one, we have the FARA, which is Fire and Explosion Risk Assessment. So FARA is a structured and systematic process. Here we will only detailedly analyze the fire and explosion hazards applicable to the facility, and it assesses how these fire and explosion will, or what effects this will have on the facility in an asset point of view. The difference between QRA and FARA is, or fire risk assessment is, in QRA more concentration, or more the focal point will be people, and in FARA the assets of the facility. The results of this assessment are used to ensure safe facility layouts and specify passive and active fire protection requirement, and provide input for the escape evacuation risk assessment and the ERA, which is emergency system survival assessment. So fire and risk assessment, fire and explosion risk assessment, FARA. The objectives are identifying potential fire and explosion hazards in a facility or during an activity, identifying the impact of fires and explosion on plant and equipment and facilities, providing recommendations to minimize the severity of fires and explosion, defining the required protection measures which control or mitigate the effects of fires and explosion, and assessing the opportunities to reduce the risk further from fire and explosion hazards. So this is a FARA methodology. It identifies in any MH, the first point. It's similar to the FARA. It's similar to the QRS study. It identifies the MH, then define the failure cases, then the inventory analysis will be done, then physical effects modeling, which is the consequence modeling, then the identifying the potential impacts to the critical equipment, piping, and structures. So this is the overpressure explosion contours resulting from the facility. So the next one, we have the H2S zoning study, which we have conducted. So H2S zoning study only identifies the toxic or H2S the dispersion. So first we have seen the QRA study, which analyzes the toxic and fire and explosion scenario, impact of fire, toxic and explosion scenario on people. And we have seen the FARA, which only details about the fire and explosion impacts on the asset. And now H2S zoning study, which analyze the dispersion of toxic gas or H2S. So for facilities which handle H2S, areas are classified based on the level of risk possessed by the H2S. The H2S zone classification study identified the low, medium and high risk areas in the facility and specify access controls and precautions to be adopted when entering a classified areas. So generally, in a facility, 3 H2S zones are specified. So this zoning helps us to specify any specific controls required to enter the facility, or the training requirement for the people to enter the facility. So mainly 3 zones are there. Red zone, which shows a zone of risk of immediate fatality. So here the toxic risk will be greater than 1 e to the power minus 3 per year. Or amber zone, which shows the risk of fatality, which says toxic risk is greater than 1 e raised to minus 4 per year. And yellow zone, which is a risk of irreversible health effects. So the toxic risk is greater than or equal to 1 e raised to -5 per year. So these are the three zone classification. So based upon the zone, there will be specific control. There will be more stringent controls to enter the red zone or to work in red zone. And amber zone will have comparatively lesser, but when compared to yellow zone, amber zone will be having more controls or restrictions. So zoning, H2 zoning is also a part of QRA study. We'll have the same steps with consequence assessment and the risk assessment. Will be after considering the failure frequency and the ignition, non-ignition probability. So here we'll be having only the toxic modeling. So this is the H2S zoning results we obtained from the facility, sulfur handling facility. Here we don't have any red zones, only amber zone is present and yellow zone is present. Yeah, so these are the studies we have used quantitatively for analyzing the study, for analyzing the risk over here, which include the QRA, FARA, and H2S zoning study. So we can have a Q&A session here.
Yeah, okay. So there were a few questions raised here. First is what in the risk, what are the acceptable risks which are there? So there is a matrix which is internationally accepted by all top companies. You can tell them the values, the 10 is -5 ALAP region.
Yeah, there is a it's called ALAP triangle, which we'll show at the end of the our study. So there is ALAP triangle where the risk will be unacceptable at if it is greater than 1 e raised to -3. So if anything higher than that one, we have to reduce the risk. This is the frequency actually, frequency or fatality per year. So anything less than 1 into 10 to the power -5 is will be unacceptable. So this is proposed by UKHC. So we'll have this at the end of the session.
Cascading disasters are covered in image. Normally what we do is we identify image and the impact of that image into neighboring unit or neighboring facility we consider, or vice versa. If there is a neighboring facility where their impact is coming on us, then it will be considered. So correspondingly, we need to have precautions or mitigative measures in case there is a problem in another unit, and how we are going to save the other unit which is impacted. So that is being covered. And then second one, what is the difference between qualitative risk assessment and quantitative risk assessment? So qualitative risk assessment, normally all we do in HAZOP, HAZID, NVID and OHID, it is called qualitative because we are not defining any particular value for it. But yes, we identify it that, okay, it's a major accident, or it's a minor accident, or it's a major hazard, minor hazard. So we qualitatively qualify it. But in QRA, which is, we call it quantitative risk assessment, in that we define it that if there is a leak from this particular image, how many people are going to get affected, and at each location how many buildings are affected because of explosion. So we are giving a quantity like what we have shown, no, 10 to the power -5, 10 to the power -4. So those are the event frequencies which will occur, and this is what we say. We are quantifying the risk, saying that okay, it is acceptable or it is not acceptable. I mean, normally when they define this 1 in 10 to the power -5 is in ALAP region. If your event is creating a situation where there is a person who will be killed in if there are 10 to 5 times the incidence happens, then only one fatality is expected in a year. Then this is which is called ALAP lower region, and we have to go below that also. I mean, we have to be in a range where this occurrence, I mean, number of events will be more and fatality is not expected. So this is how it is calculated. So there is a difference which I explained it about qualitative and quantitative. Then another question was a request from a candidate saying process safety webinar. Yes, definitely we'll consider your suggestion to have this process safety webinar. And some people have some internet issue regarding QRA explanation. Yeah, definitely. We are going to share these slides through YouTube, so you can have the details explanation there. If you have any queries, you can ask us. And about Bowtie software normally used is Bowtie XP or Thesis. And one question was about poultry analysis and inventory analysis of Bowtie. So normally on Bowtie, on your left side where we write threads, is going to be poultry, which is like the fault generating the top event. And on your right side, which are normally we write all consequences, which is your inventory, which the event has already occurred, and we go for consequences. So I think we can, okay, one last question, then we'll move on to the next one, was what are the limitations of risk assessment? See, experienced people should be doing it. They should have industrial background to understand what can go wrong and whether there is a risk or not. If inexperienced people do it, definitely the risk will not be identified properly, the hazard will not be proper, and people will not have any background, and then they will identify a major accident hazard into minor, and then there will be an issue. So with that, I think we can continue with the remaining session. Yes, Gayatri, please.
So we have analyzed or assessed the major accidental hazards quantitatively. So now we will see into the HCCS, which is health, safety, and environmental critical equipment and systems, and its performance standards. So HCCS are equipments and systems, or this includes all the equipment systems, including any inbuilt software or any component of these, the failure of which could cause or contribute substantially to purpose of which is to prevent or control the effect of a control of major accidental hazard. So the HCCs include all the equipments and system if its failure will cause to a MAH, or the function of the equipment is to prevent any MAH. So the HSE critical activities are the activities that are important in preventing the events with a potential to escalation or to cause serious harm to people, environment, or property. Or the HSE critical integrity activity, which includes the design, construction, installation, commissioning, operation, modification or repairing, or testing or examination, which assures the integrity of any HCCS equipment. So these three are included in the HCCS register. HCCS, which are the equipments and system, then HSE critical activities, which prevent, or which those activities which prevents the escalation, and the HSE critical integrity activity, which ensures the integrity of HCCS equipment. So these equipment will be identified. So this is UKHSC suggested SysGS model, which have all the potential barriers which can be present in the refiner, in the oil and gas industry, or any facility which prevent or which act as a layer of protection for the MH. So it can be, it's divided into 8 groups based upon the function, which includes the structural integrity. So structural integrity group include all the systems which give the structural support. Some examples can be subsea structures, foundation structures, topside structures, heavy lift cranes and mechanical handling equipment. Likewise, then process containment, which include the pressure vessel, heat exchangers, rotating equipment, tanks, all the piping system, pipelines, relief system. So all these comes in process containment. Then ignition control system, which include the hazardous area classification, non-hazardous area, then certified electrical equipments, earth bonding. So this all comes under ignition control. Then there is the second set, which these all were the prevention. Now the next one is detection system, which include the flammable gas detection system, fire and smoke detection system, toxic gas detection system. Then the protection system include all the firefighting system, which include the deluge system, fire and explosion protection, fire water distribution system, passive fire protection system. So all these comes in protection systems. Then the shutdown system, which includes the emergency shutdown. Then the emergency response system, which include the temporary refuge, toxic gas refuge, ERA, which include the muster facilities also. Then UPS system. So all these are in the emergency response. Then the life-saving system, which include the rescue facilities, lifeboats, all the PPEs, breathing air supply units. So all these comes under the life-saving system. So all these constitutes the HCCS. So basically, this model is called SysGIS model. This is the internationally accepted model for identifying the critical equipments and system. So this is how the HCCS selection will be done. So it will start with acquiring the asset register. Then we'll identify whether that location or that specific tag have a permanent role or in preventing damage. Then if it is yes, then for sure it will be a HCCS. Or if it is a no, if it doesn't have any role in preventing damage, then we'll identify whether it have a role in controlling damage. Again, it will be if the answer is yes, it will be identified as a HCCS. If the answer is no, we'll again have the question whether it have a role in mitigating damage. So by asking these questions, whether either it should have a role in preventing, or it should have in controlling damage, or in mitigating damage. So these tags will be identified as a HCCS, and those equipment which doesn't have any role in these three, then it will be identified as a non-SCCS. So the benefit of identifying the HCCS and the non-critical equipments are, so we know which equipment need more detailed inspection plan, more detailed maintenance plan. So all this will be rather than looking onto the full facility, we can give more concentration to some particular equipment which needs to be continuously monitored. So these are the HCCS identified for this particular project. We have identified the structural integrity, which include the foundation structures and surface structures. Then pressure containment, which include the pressure vessels, heat exchangers, ignition control system, which have the certified electrical equipment, earth bonding. Then detection system for flammable gas detectors and toxic gas detectors, protection system, shutdown system was there. Then emergency response also. So once we have identified all these critical equipments, we'll generate the performance standards for those equipments. So performance standard is a statement which can be expressed in qualitative or quantitative terms of the performance required by the system or item of equipment, and this is used as the basis for the assurance and verification of HCCS throughout the life cycle of the installation. So now first step, we have identified all the critical equipment. Now the second step is we will define the performance standard, or it's a criteria that how these critical equipment should behave. So once we have the basis of performance standard, we can always ensure that the critical equipment is doing its function. Performance standard shall focus on identifying the MAT which shall be used to align the PM plans to be carried such that HCCS integrity can be assured. So performance standards will also identify the MAT. MAT is the minimum assurance task which a equipment shall perform. So this MATs, or the minimum assurance task, will be required to test, measure and record of the performance of the HCCS. So now we have we have reached the second one, which is ESA study, which ESA study will be identifying emergency system. So we have got a list of critical system which is required to prevent the MAH. Now from these critical system, we will identify the emergency system. So emergency system survivability analysis, or is a technique to assess the survivability of emergency system to perform its design intent during a major accidental event. So we have all the critical equipment. So this critical equipment will be first checked to identify the emergency system. So once the emergency systems are identified, we need to confirm that these equipment will survive a emergency accidental event and further do its action. The overall aim of an ESA study is to identify HCCS for a given facility or installation which contributes to emergency management, then determine the vulnerability of these identified emergency systems and its subcomponents against each identified MAH, and if it is vulnerable, then whether emergency systems are fail-safe If not fail safe, then we have to check whether redundancies are available for emergency system. If the equipment is identified to be vulnerable, then we have to propose additional risk reduction measures. So in emergency system survivability analysis, we will be checking three aspects. The first one is vulnerable. So if there is a major accidental hazard, we will see whether this emergency equipment will survive it or not, or it is vulnerable. Then if it is vulnerable, we have to check whether it is fail safe. If not fail safe, if it is fail safe, the equipment is acceptable. If it is not fail safe, we have to check whether redundant equipment or another equipment are provided to perform its action. So if none of these criteria are met, then we consider the equipment to be not adequate, and we have to propose additional risk reduction measures. So this is the steps which I have already explained. So first we will have the HCCS identified, then we will identify the emergency system, then we will check HCCS is vulnerable to MH, or is it a fail safe, or if it is a redundant. If any of these criteria satisfied, then a system is acceptable. And if all these criteria fail, then the equipment is termed as not acceptable and we have to provide additional recommendation. So in our system, we have identified that fire and gas detection system is vulnerable, but it's fail safe and it's redundant. So it is acceptable. Likewise, we have checked active fire protection, which is vulnerable, however redundant. So shutdown system, it is fail safe, so it is acceptable. So in this way, we will analyze all the equipment, and if any of the system in our study, we have identified all the system acceptable. If anything is not acceptable, we have to provide additional recommendations. So now the last quantitative study, which is ERA study. So ERA is evacuation, escape and rescue assessment. So here we will be checking the adequacy of escape routes and evacuation and rescue provisions. ERA is a goal-based assessment where goals are set for escape, evacuation, rescue provision and supporting systems such as detection, alarm and communication. So an assessment is carried out to determine if these goals are achieved for the identified major accidental hazards. The goals are set to ensure that each aspect of escape, evacuation and rescue are designed robustly and performs effectively within the required time frame to allow all personnel to safely escape, muster, evacuate and be rescued to a safe place. So these are the goals. Like every person in the facility is or enough provisions are there for the employee to effectively escape from the facility during a MAH. The objectives are to specify impairment criteria of escape routes and assembly points, to assess the effects of worst credible cases, which are the MAHs identified in the QRA study, to evaluate and demonstrate the means of escape for the personnel to a safe location during an emergency event, and to evaluate the minimum escape time to a muster station. So these are the objectives of the ERA study. So these are the goals we will check. We'll first the detection, which is done by the alarm system, then assembling in a muster area, which is part of escape, then the evacuation, which is roll call identification of missing personnel, then the rescue. So in our current study, the ERA study results, so we have the impairment criteria provided by the OGP standards, which will tell what explosion or what is the level of impairment from each of the consequent effect. Like explosion 0.3 bar will be affecting the escape routes. So we have identified, it's a consequence based approach. We'll use the FAST software to get the extent of 0.3 bar. And if the escape route falls in the area, the escape route will be impaired. So this we have, the first one we have seen is the escape route. So now the assembly points will also be checked for its impairment. Then the escape time required to reach each assembly points will be calculated. So this is the ERA study. So finally, we will assess that all the escape routes or assembly points are adequate to safely evacuate the person during an MH. If it is not adequate, then we will propose additional recommendation to provide alternative escape routes to for the safe evacuation during a MH. Yep. So
Okay, so we'll have a quick question answer. The first question I can see is, does ESA plus ERA equal to drills? The answer is ESA ERA is the outcome of based on the QRF quantitative risk assessment, and which talks about nothing related to I mean, if you are asking the question drilling, yeah, it's part. If we do QRA for that, yeah, definitely it is. Of course, it is included in a QRA outcome or HSCI of drilling operation also. If you are talking about drills, which is mock drill, it's nothing to do with it because the outcome of these studies will be included for the mock drills. In the sense, your PIPs or emergency response plan will take action accordingly to ensure that if there is one escape route or one particular equipment which is being hampered, so it will be relocated. If escape route is blocked because of these outcome of QRA, then definitely there should be an alternative route which is visible. One more question was asked regarding performance standard. I will go, and in this performance standard, say what are performance standard, and because it is taken from equipment specification. See, performance standard is which will give you the minimum assurance task to be carried out to ensure the integrity of the particular HSCCS, which is critical, either equipment or system, and this one will give you an idea what is to be checked and where to find those records and what are the pass and fail criteria of this. So if such as like if you are talking about structures, if there is a crack on the structure visible or there is some load testing procedures are available, when it was carried out, what is the outcome of that particular inspection, or what is the outcome of uh, visual inspection of a support system or structural system, and those will be recorded in some of the records which will be reviewed and corrective action will be taken. So this will ensure that the integrity of that structure is maintained. There was another question regarding structural integrity. What is structural integrity? It talks about support systems mainly. It talks about your strengthening supports or any equipment or any columns in, particularly when you say downstream or petrochemical oil and gas side, or a platform if you talk about, then it talks about the offshore platform, their structure, their supports, the criticality of those fireproofing of certain supports, which is important. So structural integrity comes into that. Then there was another question about HSCCS, which is only identified by BOTI. BOTI does not identify HSCCS. BOTI gives a guidance to which system. See, it starts with hazard. So when we talk about hazard, and then we get all these major accident hazard, BOTI is a representation of those, pictorial representation of those major accident hazards, and that BOTI indicates which are the system which are critical, which will ensure that if the integrity is maintained, the major accident will not happen. Those will drill down in detail from the asset register. Say if you talk about consequences and say firefighting system, if you talk about maintenance of fire water pump or healthiness of fire water network, which is critical, because when you are doing firefighting, your system should be available and there should be sufficient amount of water is available to fight fire. So this is how it is calculated. Not that BOTI gives you HSCCS. We have to drill down after identifying the system and go down to the extent which are the system covered in it. It will talk, BOTI will talk about relief system, but what are the relief system in a sense? What are the PSVs, thermal relief, pressure safety relief valve, PVRVs if they are important for the tank for not to collapse. So those are important, drill down to that extent in asset register, and then we have to identify HSCCS critical from that asset register. And somebody asked one question about hazard and seal. These are normally carried out whether this ESA, ERA and PS is carried out only in the Middle East or internationally. So answer to that question, ERA, ESA, everything is required because this is part of, the overall uh, completeness of one of the project facilities with respect to HSE part. I mean, what are the impacts which are being used, and if there are HSE impact, so what it happens, I mean, whether it is definitely your plant will also have all these escape routes or safety equipments, or even shutdown push button systems and everything, which have to be protected. So it is not only for the Middle East, it's for the all plant which are doing this. So I think that's it from, I mean, this much we will take, then we'll proceed for the next session.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So we have seen the assessment of MH. We have seen the critical systems also. Now we will see the ALAP demonstration, or which is the conclusion of these studies, to ensure that we have identified all the hazards potential to the facility. We have classified it into MH and non-MH, and we have assessed it, and we have adequate safeguards in place. Yeah. So we have first the MOPO, which is metrics of permitted operation. So this is also a quantitative study. So MOPO studies act as a basis for the permit to work system, and it is a crucial that an operation be stopped in time to avoid all types of losses, whether human, environmental, or asset related. And MOPO study helps to understand how the risk of the operation is increased and which of the critical activities require a permission to operate, such that the associated risk remains acceptable. So MOPO is considered as a permitted operation manuals. So MOPO, it's a matrix which shows the permitted operation. If two activities are ongoing, or if there is one operation to be stopped, then what are the losses, or how we can proceed with the existing control measures. So this is a traffic light kind of matrix where we have different colors. With red condition means this operation is not permitted if this particular safety system is not available, or if without the critical activity. And amber shows that okay, you can proceed with caution, with appropriate risk assessment and provide additional controls. And green, which shows this doesn't require any further assessment, and you can continue safe to proceed. So this is the MOPO matrix, which shows the activities. So we have the x-axis and y-axis. So I'll just explain quickly. We have the construction activities ongoing. So this is in an existing facility. So construction activities ongoing, and we have the existing operation activity. So we will see each of the construction activity, and we will check whether it is okay to go with the existing operation. And if there is requirement of any shutdown, or if it is not permitted to have the particular construction along with the operation, then we will have to have a red symbol which shows that not permitted. So this is the matrix of permitted operations. So now we came to the conclusion of the final step of ALAP demonstration. So ALAP means as low as reasonably practical. So once the risk evaluation is complete, appropriate risk reduction measures shall be identified to reduce the risk further, to demonstrate ALAP and to determine the residual risk. The risk reduction measures include preventive or control measures, including the likelihood reduction and mitigation or recovery measures, which reduces the consequence. The key concept in using the ALAP principle is a trade-off between the benefits and the cost of risk reduction measures. So eventually, a point of diminishing returns is reached wherein expenditure increases markedly and risk reduction diminishes rapidly. So a cost-benefit analysis can be used with risk analysis and entails a comparison of the sacrifice, means the cost, and the risk reduction, which is the benefit achieved for a risk reduction measures. So ALAP demonstration, in ALAP demonstration, we will choose the optimum point where there will be a trade-off between the benefits and the cost. So after that particular point, the point of the diminishing return is reached, wherein expenditure will be very high and the risk reduction will be very less. So we will be choosing that point as the ALAP. So this is the emergency response plan, which shows after we have now identified the alarm, which shows that okay, at this particular point we have reduced our risk to as low as reasonably practical. Then at the final we will see the emergency response plan. So till now we have the proactive approach. Now if something goes wrong in the facility, a response plan will be there. So the response plan will be reviewed to check its adequacy to coma. So the objective of emergency response plan is to develop, implement and maintain a management system which will be activated in any emergency situation, and it will minimize the harmful effects to human life, the environment, assets and reputation, and it will assist in return to normal and safe operation. So if a potential major accident hazard effects extend beyond the site boundary, then an off-site emergency plan must be also prepared. So this emergency response plan can be off-site or on-site. So now the third or last portion of the HSCIA, which is the health part, occupational risk assessment, ORA. So identification of health hazards in the workplace and subsequent evaluation of risk to health, taking account of the impact to health and likelihood of the exposure. So this we have already covered in the OHIT. We will identify all the potential health hazards. Then occupational health monitoring will be conducted for the identified SCGs. All the similarly exposed groups from the facility will be identified, and the health hazards associated with the physical agents, chemical agents, biological agents, ergonomic factors, and psychosocial hazards will be assessed over here using qualitative and quantitative means. And finally, a industrial hygiene monitoring or health monitoring plan will be developed for those exposed groups. So the approach will be, the first will be project and site-specific data collection and review. So this include the document reviews and the site monitoring. Then a OHIT or ORA workshops will be conducted, which will qualitatively evaluate. Then a quantitative evaluation of the health risk. Then according to that, remedial action and plan parties will be assigned for the responsibility. Then record and document any occupational health risks and the preparation of the ORA report. So the conclusions and recommendations from this study is all major accidental hazards have been identified and suitable control and mitigation and recovery measures are proposed, engineered and are implemented. So the first step is identification, then identification of control measures, existing control measures, checking the adequacy of control measures and recommending further control measures to reduce the risk. And it is demonstrated that operation can be achieved within the quantitative criteria and alert levels are demonstrated. Then all potential significant environmental impacts have been identified, suitably analyzed and assessed for significance, and relevant control, mitigation and recovery measures are being implemented. So all the major accident hazards from process safety, from environment are identified. Then all high, medium occupational health risks have been systematically identified and suitable action to mitigate these risks are in place and to protect employees from this risk have been taken. So finally, an implementation plan that shows how the control, mitigation and recovery measures for significant environmental impact, major accidental hazards and high medium occupational health risk will be implemented and managed throughout the facility. So then the final thing, we have seen all the high medium hazards. Now all the medium and low risk hazards will be managed and controlled via existing HSCMS health safety environmental management system and the associated HSE systems and procedures. So these are the conclusions and recommendation normally we obtain from the from a HSCIA study. Yep. So we can have
few questions which are raised. I will go through and then we will answer. The first question which was asked for whether HSCIA, what frequency we should do it, and the answer is if your facility there are no changes, then every 5 years it is being re-validated, or if there are changes which are generating new MAH in your facility, or there is even the reduction, so impact we have to see. So any changes which will have impact on your identified major accident hazard, whether it adds in or it goes out of it, then it has to be rechecked. The system has to be rechecked. So this is the answer for the HSCI frequency. when to do it. Second, okay, ERA and ESA, are they consequence based or provide recommendation on it, or it's a frequency based? So ERA and ESA, consequence based or frequency based? You can proceed, then I will answer.
Yeah, ERA and ESA are normally consequence-based approach. So we have already we have also received questions regarding the impairment frequency. So the impairment frequency will be taken from the OGP. So what will be the effect level to impair the escape routes or the vulnerability of system? So this will be a consequence. So ERA and ESA, we will see the consequence-based approach, and before considering it into ALA, we will see what is the frequency of this occurrence.
Okay, the next question is, does ERA means emergency plan? No. ERA is a separate study. Emergency plan is separate. Then what standards are being used for escape routes? For escape routes, we are not talking about, we are talking about the impairment of escape routes. So here the outcome from the QRA will give you the impairment of escape routes. We are not here discussing right now how to identify the escape routes. Then does ESA in ESA gets credit of any seal rating? See, in this case, we are having, you know, this impact on those equipments or safety equipment such as emergency shutdown valves, and then it comes as whether they should be fire rated or explosion proof is required or not. That will be decided, and not based on the seal rating. Seal rating goes into the reliability. There was a question on seal also. What is safety integrity level? It shows the reliability of equipment, how critical or how reliable the equipment should be if there are, you know, they are to be used in controlling the process. So any shutdown or interlocks which are being used, how reliable it should be. And okay, somebody asked question, what is FEED? That is front end engineering design. And one good question was asked, whether HSCCS can start from the concept or, you know, concept stage. So I would say rather concept stage, the process is finalized, the project idea is finalized into on paper, but HSCCS will come when you are into feed design, feed part of the project onwards. Then all this, you know, system level and everything, tag level, then finally you will go into asset register when you finalize all the equipment. And okay, MOPO and SIMOPS. SIMOPS is mainly used for all constructability related activities, and MOPO normally concentrate on operation related activities. So that is the difference between SIMOPS and MOPO. The concept of doing this is same, but the activities will differ from construction and operation. And
we have received some questions on software for quantitative assessment. So in this particular study, we have used FAST and SAFETI. However, there are a lot of other softwares also, as some other softwares which are already in the questions came for Aloha and FRED. So any of these industry accepted software can be used to quantitative studies.
Okay, then there is one more question which talks about ICF. Incident command system is a part of ERP. Yes, of course, it's a part of, because based on that only the action will be taken care, who should control at what level. Then few more question. I am running through it. Think you can have a flow chart. I think we have answered most of the question. Anything you specific, you can send us through email, and then we can answer it.
And we have received some questions regarding other studies. Like, due to time restrictions, we are not able to answer all the other questions regarding to HASSO, BOTI, particularly EIA. So we'll have frequent webinars for individually for or specifically to these topics, including QRA, BOTIs, EIA, environmental studies, HASSO, SIL, and all these. So please stay tuned to our LinkedIn and social media sites. So we'll be posting it, so you can join for particular webinars.
I think that covers almost all the questions. Now we can
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you everybody for participating. Please keep in touch and in LinkedIn with our company, and you will get to know more knowledge about other programs also. So thank you everybody.